Hey guys, with recent discussions about an expansion team almost guaranteed now to be going to Seattle, I thought to myself, once they get the team, which I really do hope does happen, because I think Seattle will be a great place for an NHL team. But once they get the team, just like what we witnessed this over the past 2 to 3 years with the Golden Knights, or once they were granted an expansion franchise in Las Vegas, the question then became, what will the team be called? And, with the lack of videos I've had over the past close to 2 months now, and with recent talk about Seattle renovating their existing arena there in Seattle, and with the fact that Houston, Texas has expressed interest in NHL hockey, and with the fact that there was a recent article posted on sportslogos.net within the past month or so, where supposedly there were some website domains that were trademarked that had to do with some type of potential future campaign to possibly bring an NHL team to Portland, Oregon. And I thought to myself, you know what? What a cool idea for a video, considering that, what do you call these cities' teams if they get franchises? And so with that, guys, I just thought just to get back into getting into videos again, I thought to myself, let's do a video about what I would name certain cities' teams if they got NHL franchises. I just thought that this would be a fun little video I would do today, just so that I could get back into, or get back to updating this here with videos again, this channel with videos again. So I just thought it'd be something that I could quickly put together, that I could put together for you guys, so that you guys have something to watch while I start to get to work on other stuff. Obviously, I'm going to talk about Seattle. Seattle's the major elephant in the room, and then there's also Houston and Portland. So after that, I have a bunch of other cities. I have multiple Canadian cities. I have a few cities that used to have NHL franchises. And on top of that, I also have some cities that used to have World Hockey Association franchises as well. And for anyone who doesn't know, the WHA was a league that did try to compete with the NHL throughout the 1970s until they ultimately folded by the end of the decade. And then what ended up happening was the Nordiques, the original Winnipeg Jets, the Edmonton Oilers, and the New England Whalers all joined the NHL in time for the 1980s, where, of course, New England actually renamed themselves to just the Hartford Whalers. And they were, of course, the Hartford Whalers until they moved to Carolina in, I believe, 1997. So that happened. So there's some cities on my list that are former WHA's team cities, or cities that used to have WHA teams. There's also some cities that used to have NHL cities. And there's also other ones that have never had either. Actually, yeah, I think there's one or two on my list that have never had either. Actually, maybe three. But yeah, also another thing I want to make clear to you guys is there will be some cities on my list that may either not get a team for an extremely long time, or they may even never get a team. So I thought to myself, you know what, this is just a fun video. It's an interesting topic. I thought, why not throw in some other bonus cities as well, just for the fun of it, eh? But anyways, let's start with the biggest elephant on my list. I'm not going to say elephant in the room. I'm just going to say elephant on my list, because I have a list of cities here, and that is definitely Seattle, Washington. If Seattle ends up getting a team, which in my opinion is basically guaranteed, they just have to cross T's and dot some I's, in my opinion. I think it's a done deal. And hopefully Seattle will be playing in the NHL within the next 3 to 5 years, hopefully. I think Seattle, I can't say it enough, I think Seattle will do really well, and I think they will have a real good rivalry with the Vancouver Canucks. And, to see another Western city that is successful, just like what we've already seen with Las Vegas, I think that would be really good. In fact, Las Vegas almost won the Stanley Cup in their first year. I mean, you got to give the Golden Knights a huge tip of the cap. And you also, and speaking of caps, I want to congratulate you Washington Capital fans out there who may be watching this, because I'm very happy for you guys and for the fact that you guys have finally got a chance to see your team win the cup. And I'm also happy because, in my opinion, Alexander Ovechkin was the best player in the game right now who hasn't won the cup yet. So I am very, very happy for Washington and for all of their fans. I'm also very happy for the Golden Knights fans too. I mean, I didn't think that Las Vegas would be getting a hockey team. Then all of a sudden, it never crossed my mind. And then all of a sudden they build an arena and then bam, they've got a franchise. It's been really exciting to watch. And you know what? I got to confess, the idea of one day planning a trip to go see a Golden Knights game, you know, that in my opinion sounds pretty damn cool. And, you know, I gotta say, I think that the NHL and the Golden Knights have come up with a really good idea for putting a team there in the first place, because there's so many tourists from all over the place that go to Vegas for entertainment. So the fact that they can now go and catch a hockey game too, in my opinion, it's a brilliant idea. But back to Seattle. If I were to name a Seattle NHL team, I would either get the rights to the WHL's Seattle Thunderbirds name, logo, and jerseys, because I know they're the Hartford Whalers' old navy blue era jerseys before they moved to Carolina, but I really don't give a damn. They're very nice jerseys, and their logo, in my opinion, is absolutely terrific. It's a beautiful logo. It's a classic, in my opinion. One of the best in junior hockey, for damn sure. Maybe even the best in the entire Canadian Hockey League. I'd have to look at all of the Canadian Hockey League logos and make a judgment call after I've seen all of them, but the Seattle Thunderbirds logo is one of my absolute favorites in the entire Canadian Hockey League. That goes for the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, because the CHL branches off into those three leagues, and then those three leagues champions plus the host team meet up every year or the host city of the Memorial Cup meet up every year for a tournament to decide a Memorial Cup or a Canadian Hockey League champion. So, but yeah, I mean, if an NHL team could just get the Seattle Thunderbirds and just go, bam, you're an NHL team now, that would be amazing. The Thunderbirds name, the logo, the jerseys are all terrific in my opinion. I mean, if I remember correctly, there is quite a bit of gray on the white jersey. I haven't actually seen that one in a while, but I would take off a little bit of I would reduce the amount of gray on the white jersey, but besides that, they could enter the NHL tomorrow and they would have some of the better looking jerseys in the entire league, in my opinion. And, you know, but the thing is with Seattle, I highly doubt they're actually going to get the rights to everything, to the entire Thunderbirds identity. So with that in mind, my actual number one choice would be Seattle Totems. There's a hockey history. There used to be a team called the Totems, and I just think it's a really good name. And it's a unique name, and a team called the Seattle Totems would really stand out. You know what? I really, really like the name. And you know what? I think either Seattle Thunderbirds or Totems would be my number 1 and 2 choices without question. My favorite choice is actually the Thunderbirds because of the amazing identity that they've already got. But I don't think they're going to get that identity, and I don't think they're going to try and take it either. I'm sure, I almost can guarantee that they won't. So for me, Totems would be my choice. Now, I understand that there was a team called the Seattle Metropolitans that did win the Cup a little bit over a century ago. But the thing is, I don't really like the name Seattle Metropolitans. Another name that has been brought out lately is Seattle Sockeyes. Now, it rolls off the tongue great, I agree with people, but I hate the name and I hate the idea of an NHL team being named after sockeye salmon. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's kind of, I don't know how to really explain it, but I just don't like the name. I just think it's kind of meh. Now, another name that has been brought up that a lot of people seem to like is Seattle Kraken. Yes, I get the whole release the Kraken jokes and all that, but you know what, guys? I don't really care for that name either. For an NHL franchise, I don't like the idea of a Seattle Kraken NHL team. I just don't care for that name much either. Better than Sockeyes, better than Metropolitans in my opinion, but I still don't really care for the name. Now, another name that could be considered too is the Seattle Breakers. Now the Western Hockey League Seattle Thunderbirds actually used to be called the Seattle Breakers before they changed their name back in the 1980s. I believe around 1984-ish, if I'm not mistaken. And the thing is, Seattle Breakers isn't a bad name either, but for me, it's either Thunderbirds or Totems, and since I highly doubt they're going to take the identity away from the WHL's Thunderbirds, for me, my choice would be Seattle Totems, hands down. Now, moving on my list, I'm going to move on to the city of Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, I understand that the Columbus Blue Jackets are Ohio's team right now, and I highly doubt that Cincinnati has plans for an NHL arena right now. But if they ever did get a team, I would name them the Stingers after the WHA team with the exact same name. I think Cincinnati Stingers rolls off the tongue well. It's a really cool name in my opinion, and it's got a hockey history. And I really like the name. Also, I know the East Coast Hockey League has a team called the Cincinnati Cyclones there. I really like that name too. But if there was a Cincinnati Cyclones team trying to enter the NHL, I would not blame Carolina for throwing a bit or being a little bit against that name, or being against that name at all. Or sorry, what I'm trying to say is I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina would have a problem with that, because I wouldn't blame, if I were the owner of the Hurricanes, I wouldn't really want another NHL team being named after extreme weather. I wouldn't myself. And you know what? I like the name Cincinnati Cyclones, but for me, for that reason, with the Hurricanes already in the NHL, I would call them the Cincinnati Stingers. Now, the next city on my list is another one that's probably not going to get a team either ever or for an extremely long time, and that is Indianapolis. Now, if Indianapolis ever got a team, I would call them the Indianapolis Racers. For me, it's either bringing back the name from the World Hockey Association and call them the Indianapolis Racers or nothing. And here's my reason, because truth is, Wayne Gretzky actually started his pro hockey career playing for the Indianapolis Racers of the World Hockey Association before he went to Edmonton and started his storied NHL career. Now, the thing with the Indianapolis Racers name is that, in my opinion, when arguably the greatest hockey player of all time, Wayne Gretzky himself, started his career playing for a team called the Indianapolis Racers before he was traded to Edmonton, if that isn't enough reason to call your team the Indianapolis Racers, I don't know what is. And that's why, even though I think the odds of Indianapolis ever getting an NHL team are extremely low, at least for the next many, many decades, in my opinion, but if they ever did get a team, I couldn't call them anything else but the Indianapolis Racers. I mean, how could you not bring that name back when Wayne Gretzky started his professional hockey career with a team called the Indianapolis Racers? If that isn't reason to call your team a new NHL team the Indianapolis Racers, I don't know what the hell is. So I've talked about Seattle, I've talked about Cincinnati, and I've talked about Indianapolis. So I started off with the city that is almost guaranteed, in my opinion at least, to be getting an NHL franchise soon, which I think is good. Then I've talked about Cincinnati, and now I've talked about Indianapolis. Now I'm going to move on to Milwaukee, which is a city that I've seen brought up many times here on YouTube and on Facebook and all over social media as a potential place for a hockey team. I think it's got the potential to work. I mean, Wisconsin, when I think of that part of the U.S., I think of the Green Bay Packers and all those crazy wintry games I've seen for years, where you get crazy snowstorms and stuff in Green Bay. I think Milwaukee would be a good place for a hockey team as well. Now, as for what I would call them, there is an American Hockey League team there right now called the Milwaukee Admirals, as far as I know, which I think they're still there. And they've been there for a while, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I really do like the name Milwaukee Admirals. I actually think it's a really good name. Now, another thing I forgot to mention earlier on in this video is that I did read up a little bit on Wikipedia about Milwaukee and, of course, the city of Baltimore too, which I haven't talked about yet, But also, I read off on Wikipedia's or page on Wikipedia about a list of potential cities for relocation or expansion in the NHL, and Milwaukee's on that list. So I did a little bit of quick skimming on there, and Milwaukee is along Lake Michigan, I believe. And I think it said on there that Milwaukee is known for, or sailing's popular in Milwaukee. So I thought to myself, what about the Milwaukee Sailors? I think it'd be okay. Now, a name that I do like more, that I mentioned earlier, was actually the Milwaukee Breakers, as in breaking a wave. And yes, I mean, if Seattle doesn't go with the Seattle Breakers name, perhaps one day there could be a team in Milwaukee called the Milwaukee Breakers. I think it's actually a pretty cool name, actually. And for me, it'd be either Admirals or Breakers. I think those are both really good names. And Sailors, I like it too, but I don't like it as much. But yeah, I think Milwaukee, I know the Milwaukee Bucks are either just got a new arena or they've got a new arena coming that is almost built. I'm talking about the Bucks of the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks basketball team. So if their arena was built with a potential future NHL team in mind, might not be a bad place for a team. I mean, if a team wanted to go to Milwaukee, I wouldn't be against it, and I'd be interested to see how they do, to be honest. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't really know too much about Milwaukee, but I think Wisconsin's a pretty cold climate during the winters, and I think, you know what, it could probably be a decent place for an NHL team. So, but yeah, for me, I would either call them the Admirals or the Breakers, and possibly the Sailors, but that's a little bit the lowest on my list. For me, it's either Admirals or Breakers. So, moving on to Cleveland, Ohio. Now, Columbus is Ohio's team right now, and I have my doubts that Cleveland is all of a sudden going to say, hey, we want an NHL team too. I mean, a Battle of Ohio would be interesting, but I don't know if Cleveland's going to start trying to woo an NHL franchise over there, because I don't think they have an NHL-ready arena. And the last time the NHL did have a team in Cleveland, the Cleveland Barons only played a couple of seasons in the NHL before they merged with the Minnesota North Stars. So, and also there was a World Hockey Association team called the Cleveland Crusaders, which rolls off the tongue really well. But for me, if Cleveland ever got a team again, I would just bring back the Cleveland Barons name. I think it's a really nice name, and it is unique too. I've never heard of any other team called the Barons. So Cleveland Barons, it already has a really, really short-lived NHL history, but hey, I mean, it'd be a cool name to bring back, and I'm sure that if they ever got a team again, they would last longer than 2 seasons. So for me, it'd be Barons. Crusaders would be okay too, but I think I like Barons a little bit better myself, actually. Just because of the fact that they used to have an NHL team in Cleveland called the Barons. For that reason, the already established history, although very, very short, I would call them the Cleveland Barons. Now, the next city on my list is yet another one that is likely to not get an NHL team anytime soon, San Diego, California. Now, with San Diego, they are home to the American Hockey League's San Diego Gulls, which just so happen to be the Anaheim Ducks farm team, eh? But with San Diego, they used to have a WHA team called the San Diego Mariners. Personally, I would bring that name back in a heartbeat if they got an NHL team, because of the history already established in the WHA with the San Diego Mariners from decades ago. Another name that I would even consider is San Diego Gulls, and just take the name from the AHL's team, which, you know what? I would make a change to it, though. If I were to name the team and Mariners didn't work, I would actually consider calling them the San Diego Seagulls. Reason being is because I think it rolls off the tongue much better. Like, for example, I think the Seattle Seahawks of the NFL sounds much better than just the Seattle Hawks. Seattle Seahawks rolls off the tongue really, really well. With San Diego, if they got an NHL team and they were called the San Diego Seagulls, it would roll off the tongue really well. at least in my personal opinion. But with San Diego, with the name Mariners, I know there's the Seattle Mariners in Major League Baseball. But my argument is if you can have the Texas Rangers in Major League Baseball and the New York Rangers in the National Hockey League, really, I mean, I can't see why it would be a problem if there was an NHL team that was also called the Mariners. But remember, folks, it was probably much easier to have multiple leagues establish themselves with teams that have the same name in different leagues than it is now. So probably nowadays it'd be the safe bet to go with San Diego Seagulls, even though I think the name Mariners is a really good name as well. And on top of that, it already has a WHA history as well. And I like that too. The name Mariners already has a bit of a hockey history in San Diego as well, eh? But for me, it would be either Mariners or Seagulls. And Seagulls would be a unique name. But the thing is, as I said earlier, the chances of San Diego getting a hockey team at least anytime soon is probably very, very small. And if that, at the most. But now I'm going to move on to one of the second highest team on my list second highest city, or second most likely city on my list to probably end up with an NHL team in the future, and that is Houston, Texas. Now, if Houston does get an NHL team, I would either bring back the name Houston Aeros, because Gordie Howe used to play for the Houston Aeros of the World Hockey Association, and I believe they actually won a few titles as the Houston Aeros. Or sorry, I think the Houston Aeros of the WHA did win a few titles. Sorry, I worded that wrong. My bad. You know what? It already has a pretty storied hockey history with that name, and I think it'd be a really good name. In fact, there was even, I believe, an American Hockey League team called the Houston Aeros as well. I don't think they have a team there called the Houston Aeros anymore. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, by the way. But I like the name. It has a storied history. It has both a World Hockey Association history and an American Hockey League history too with that name. So an NHL team being called the Houston Aeros would be something that I would be happy with, and I think would probably be a pretty popular choice for a name if Houston does get an NHL team, which I do think is very possible. And you know what, guys? I actually think a battle of Texas between the Stars and a Houston team would be really cool. I mean, imagine that and a Battle of Quebec making a comeback as well. That would be two new rivalries that I think would be awesome. And then if you add that on top of Seattle versus Vancouver in the Pacific Northwest, wow. That could be 3 new rivalries in the National Hockey League. That would be pretty cool to see. That would make some of the games throughout the regular season even that much more exciting. But also, if the name Houston Aeros didn't work, which I think that would be my choice, actually. I really like that name. I also thought of the idea of Houston Colts. Now, when I think of Houston and I think of Texas, I think of the old Wild Wild West, and I think of horses, and I think of cowboys, stuff like that. And old Wild Wild West type of stuff, Western times, stuff like that. And when I think of Houston, Texas, I think of Colts. Now, and like an old or like a young horse. Now, I know that some people will probably argue that the name Colts could be, you know, if there's like if some of you may be thinking that I'm suggesting the name Colts and have like a Colt 45 as the logo, or a cowboy swinging around a pair of Colt 45s. That's not what I'm thinking of. When I think of the name Colt, I'm thinking of a young horse. Of a racing horse. And you know what? I know that some people in recent years have been saying that logos that have the imagery of guns is something that they consider offensive. For me, if I were to call this team the Houston Colts, I wouldn't have any guns as a part of the logo identity, whether it's a secondary logo with, say, a star and a pair of Colt 45s, or a cowboy as the logo, flinging a couple Colt 45s around. No, if it were me and I called this team the Houston Colts. What I'm trying to get at is I would name them the Colts based off of a colt horse, as in a young horse, racehorse. And you know what? Something like that, a name like that, the name Houston Colts sounds very Texas to me, and I think it'd be a cool name. And if you did a really good logo with a horse and potentially just a cowboy on a horse with a hockey stick. Now, folks, if any of you are hockey historians or you know a lot about hockey history, I'm sure there's going to be somebody thinking, wait, back just before the New York Rangers began playing in the National Hockey League in 1926, they did originally consider a logo with a cowboy on a horse, I believe, waving a hockey stick around. But ever since 1926, the Rangers have had nothing but their iconic and famous Rangers wordmark along the front of their jerseys. They've never had a logo a day in their NHL history with the cowboy or the concept of a cowboy on a horse, riding a horse with a hockey stick. So, in fact, as far as I know, nobody even knows what that logo even looked like anyway. So if a team came along in Houston and they called them the Colts and they had a cowboy waving a hockey stick while riding a horse, I think it would work. And I think it could be a pretty cool logo, actually, if done right. And, you know, either Arrows or Colts, in my opinion, are both really good names. And folks, for anybody wondering, I wouldn't use any secondary logos or anything like that with guns on them. I mean, nowadays, I've heard a lot of people say throughout the internet and on TV that they feel that type of imagery in sports is offensive. I'm not going to get into that or what I think about it, but, you know, for that reason, and you know what, I think personally I'd rather have a team named after a young racehorse anyway than a gun. And that's why when I say that I would call them the Houston Colts, I'm talking about a racehorse, not a gun. And if you think I'm seeming a little bit paranoid about it, the only reason is because I'm just trying to say that with my idea of it is that I'm thinking of a horse, not a gun. I don't really want to get into that argument either. But also, you know, for me, it'd either be Colts or Arrows. I think they're both great names. And for me, I think my choice would actually be Arrows because of the already established history of the Houston Arrows in the World Hockey Association and the American Hockey League as well. Now, the next city on my list is Quebec. And this one's going to be quick. Either for me, it would be Quebec, Nordiques, or nothing. Period. Nothing else. Now, the next city on my list will be Markham, Ontario. And I bring up Markham because Markham had an arena proposed there, which is, I believe, just outside of Toronto, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not too familiar with Ontario, to be honest. But for me, if Markham did end up getting a team, which I kind of have my doubts on it because they don't have an arena right now and because they're really close to Toronto, and I wouldn't blame Toronto for being a little bit frustrated about a new team setting up shop right in their turf. I can understand Toronto having a problem with it. But if Markham did get a team, I thought of either the Markham Monarchs, the Markham Mavericks, or the Markham Royals. Now, when I think of the name Markham, or the city of Markham, I kind of think of something out of England. So I kind of thought maybe something to do with royalty. That's why I thought of Markham Monarchs or Markham Royals. Now, once again, my argument is that if you can have the Texas Rangers in baseball and the New York Rangers in hockey, I can't see why Markham Royals would be an issue if you already have, like, for example, the Kansas City Royals in baseball and even the Victoria Royals in the Western Hockey League. I mean, and I'll also throw in that argument too, because the Victoria Royals do play games every year in the United States, playing teams such as the Seattle Thunderbirds or the Spokane Chiefs, and all of the teams in the U.S. division for that matter. So, because I know there is a U.S. division in the Western Hockey League. So, you know, if there's already a team called the Royals in junior hockey playing American teams and playing games in the United States anyway, I think a team called the Markham Royals would probably be just fine. Okay, maybe there would be a potential trademark issue with Victoria's Western Hockey League team. That is possible, but this is just more of a what if. Like, what if they did get a team? I'm just thinking of names of what I would call them if they did actually get a team, which, to be honest, I do think is highly unlikely at least at this time. But yeah, if that didn't work, Markham Monarchs is also a really good name in my opinion. I like it too. Now, moving on to Portland, Oregon. This one's interesting because I can't really think of names that would really fly. Now, originally I thought of the Portland Pilots, but I believe there's a university in Portland that has already got all their sports teams called the Portland Pilots. So that wouldn't work. Now, I also thought of Portland Brewers because when I think of Portland, Oregon, I think of craft beer. Okay, maybe I've seen a few too many commercials on TV over the years, but, you know, I mean, I know there's the Milwaukee Brewers, not burgers, Milwaukee Brewers in baseball, and, you know, I'm sure Portland Brewers in hockey would work too. I think it's a good name. And now also another name I thought of was, what about the Portland Lumberjacks? Now, that's a name I've seen brought up lately too. I mean, I know that when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks, they already have a secondary logo of Johnny Canucks. So for that reason, maybe that name doesn't really fly. But I don't know. I think it would probably be okay, but I could be wrong. But for me, I think maybe the best bet would be either Portland Brewers or something else. And speaking of something else too, back to Seattle. Seattle Cougars as well would be a name that I would be a fan of that name too. I like the name Seattle Cougars too, actually. Now, moving on to Hamilton. Now, they've been brought up before. They don't have an arena, and being between Buffalo and Toronto, I can't see them getting a team anytime soon. Even though I think Hamilton would probably do really well, but there is a chance it could be at the expense of the Buffalo Sabres, and to be honest, I wouldn't want to see that either. If they could both be successful and Toronto could be still as great as ever, then put a team in Hamilton too. But if they can't, then okay, I can appreciate the NHL maybe not wanting a team in Hamilton. Now, if Hamilton does get a team, which I think I would be a fan of that, to be honest, I would call them the Hamilton Tigers because there was an NHL team back in the 1920s called the Hamilton Tigers. I think, for me, I mean, I also thought of Steelers, but there is the Pittsburgh Steelers in the NFL, and I don't know if they would allow an NHL team to call themselves the Steelers. I mean, I know there's also the Detroit Tigers. I mean, the thing is, besides Tigers or Steelers, because Hamilton is known as Steel Town, I don't know what else I could possibly think of for an NHL team name. But anyway, for me, if I had my way, I'd just call them the Hamilton Tigers. Now, moving on to Kansas City. Now, they do have an NHL arena, but there's been no talk about bringing a team there. At least not very much as of late. If they did get a team, I'd just bring back the Scouts name because I think the name Kansas City Scouts is unique, and they did have a few years in the NHL before they relocated to Colorado to become the Colorado Rockies. Yes, I believe they started out as the Kansas City Scouts, then they moved to become the Colorado Rockies, then they've been the New Jersey Devils ever since. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that, but correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, if not the Scouts, then take the name of Sporting Kansas City's old name, the Kansas City Wizards. I like that name too. But the thing is, that was the name of their current Major League Soccer team before they recently, in the past 5 or 6 years or so, I can't remember when they did it, but they rebranded themselves from the Kansas City Wizards to Sporting Kansas City. So now that the name Kansas City Wizards is up for grabs, if Major League Soccer's Sporting Kansas City allowed it, hey, I would be a fan of that name too. Kansas City Wizards Hockey or the Kansas City Scouts. For me, though, my number one choice would be Scouts. Now, finally on my list is the city of Baltimore. Now, I thought of either the Baltimore Battalion or because I believe they host the Preakness, which is one of the major horse races every year. I also thought of the name Baltimore Broncos. And I thought that was actually not a bad name. Baltimore Broncos rolls off the tongue really well. I actually don't even mind Battalion myself, but I think if I were to pick one, I would pick the Baltimore Broncos. Now, finally, to end this video, I'm also going to throw in one more idea that I just remembered that I put down that I forgot to mention for the city of Houston. Besides Arrows or Colts, another name that I thought of was actually the Houston Mustangs. Once again, a racing horse, something to do with horses because of, when I think of Texas, I think of the old wild, wild western days back like 200 to 300 years ago. And cowboys and horses. And you know what? I thought to myself, You know what? Maybe Houston Mustangs would be a good name too. I thought that was a cool name as well, and I would be a fan of that too. But anyways, you guys, sorry about the lack of videos over the past close to 2 months now. I've been very busy outside of the channel. But with that, you guys, I can finally end this video, and hopefully I will get back. I will have some time to get back into some NHL stuff, because we've got multiple teams with new third jerseys, and we got some other stuff that I honestly want to talk about too. But with that, you guys, I'm going to call it a wrap. And with that, take care. And of course, as always, you guys, bye for now.